Number 1. Two former NYPD officers, Michael Valda and his fiancée, Angela Polina, were caught and sentenced to life in prison for the second-degree murder of Michael's 8-year-old son, Thomas Valda. The incident was reported on January 17, 2020, when Michael called 911 to report that Thomas had fallen and stopped breathing. Although Thomas was rushed to the hospital, he was pronounced dead, and an autopsy revealed that he had died of hypothermia, which was ruled as a homicide. The investigation uncovered that Thomas had been subjected to severe abuse by Michael and Angela. As a punishment for wetting the bed, Thomas and his older brother, Anthony, were forced to sleep in an unheated garage, where the temperature reportedly fell as low as 19 degrees Fahrenheit, or -7 degrees Celsius. This caused Thomas to suffer severe hypothermia, which led to his death. Prosecutors also presented evidence that Michael had a history of using his children, including Thomas and Anthony, for his own benefit. Justina Zabkavalva, Valda's ex-wife, had reported to Child Protective Services that Valda had a history of neglecting and abusing their children. However, despite these reports, Valda was able to retain custody of the children. During the trial, jurors listened to audio recordings where Michael and Polina mocked and ridiculed Thomas as he took his last breaths. The recording also revealed Valda saying he didn't care whether Thomas lived or not. On March 25, 2021, Michael Valda was found guilty of second-degree murder and endangering the welfare of a child, receiving a 40-year-to-life prison sentence. Angela Polina, his fiancée, was also convicted of second-degree murder and received the same sentence. The case sparked outrage and demanded reform in New York State's child welfare system. Critics accused Child Protective Services of failing to take action despite multiple reports of abuse, leading lawmakers to propose reforms to improve the system's response to child abuse and neglect reports. The issue of corrupt police officers is a complexing and troubling one. While most law enforcement officers serve with honor and integrity, there have been cases of corruption and abuse of power. Communities must hold police officers accountable for their actions, and departments must have robust surveillance mechanisms. Number 2. Wayne Couzens, a former Metropolitan Police officer, used his position of power to commit a series of crimes against vulnerable women. He was convicted of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering Sarah Everard in March 2021. Everard was found in a wooded area in Kent after Couzens abducted her while she was walking home from a friend's house in South London. The case sparked outrage and protests over the issue of violence against women in the UK. Wayne Couzens, a police officer in the Metropolitan Police since 2018, pleaded guilty to kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Sarah Everard in September and October of 2021. He used his police training and equipment to commit the crime. In December of 2021, Couzens received a whole life term in prison, never to be released. The judge commended the sentence, which was welcomed by Everard's family and advocates against violence against women. Couzens posed inquiries about the violence against females in the UK, igniting a wider discourse on the police's treatment of women. The Metropolitan Police came under fire for their handling of the situation, specifically for using forceful measures at a vigil for Everard, and not properly investigating allegations of sexual misconduct by police officers. As a response to the incident, the British government revealed a range of actions focused on combating violence against women. This included the formation of a novel police oversight committee to investigate allegations of police corruption, and the appointment of a new victims advocate to aid crime victims. Additionally, the event led to the enactment of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which features stricter penalties for offenses against women and girls, and new protocols for safeguarding victims of domestic violence. Number 3. Kenneth Blue's crimes as a former police officer included the murder of Jennifer Webb, a 32-year-old pregnant woman. Blue, who was the father of Webb's unborn child, allegedly shot her when they met in a scheduled area to discuss child support. He left her to die, but investigators were able to track him down as a suspect using evidence including a bullet casing and a tire track. An inmate who had shared a cell with Blue also reportedly came forward with information that Blue had confessed to the murder. Blue was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. During the trial, DNA evidence proved Blue was the father of Jennifer Webb's unborn child. The defense argued that Blue was not mentally competent at the time of the murder, but the jury rejected the argument and found him guilty of first-degree murder. Blue was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case led to a review of police procedures and protocols and increased awareness of domestic violence and the dangers of police officers abusing their power. The case of Kenneth Blue highlights the dangers of power abuse by individuals in authority positions. As a police officer, Blue used his position to commit a heinous crime and cover up an affair. The consequences of his actions were devastating, not just for Jennifer Webb, but for her family, the community, and the reputation of law enforcement. Blue's sentencing raised questions about the need for better oversight and accountability for law enforcement officials. Many have called for better training and support for police officers and increased scrutiny of those who show signs of mental illness or instability. Number 4. David Carrick, a former British Army soldier turned police officer, was part of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Team in 2009. However, he faced allegations of domestic abuse as early as 2002. Despite multiple complaints, he was recertified to remain an armed police officer in 2017. Colleagues called him Bastard Dave due to his cruel behavior. Between 2003 and 2020, Carrick met several women on dating apps, such as Badoo and Timber, and abused and sexually assaulted them. He used his position as an armed police officer to gain their trust and control them through physical and emotional abuse. He graded his victims, physically and sexually assaulted them, and imprisoned them in small spaces. Former police officer David Carrick was arrested and suspended from police work after a woman reported he sexually assaulted her in October 2021. Initially pleading not guilty to all charges, Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 charges, including 24 counts of sexual assault involving 12 female victims, in December 2022 at the Old Bailey Criminal Court. On January 16, 2023, he pleaded guilty to 4 additional charges at Southwark Crown Court. David Carrick, a former Metropolitan Police officer, was sentenced to life imprisonment and a minimum of 30 years plus 239 days on February 7, 2023, after pleading guilty to 49 charges, including 24 sexual assault charges involving 12 female victims. The Metropolitan Police has launched an internal investigation into claims of domestic abuse and sexual offenses against its employees following Carrick's conviction. Number 5. Dennis Perkins, a former Louisiana police officer, was convicted of sexually abusing children after a victim disclosed the abuse to a school counselor in 2017. Perkins was arrested and charged with 60 counts of child sexual abuse. This case serves as an example of corrupt police officers who face lifelong consequences for their actions. Victims testified at trial about the abuse they suffered at the hands of former police officer Dennis Perkins. The prosecution presented evidence, including text messages and photographs, that supported the victims' accounts. Perkins claimed that the allegations were part of a conspiracy against him, but the judge sentenced him to 100 years in prison without parole. Perkins' case drew national attention, as he had worked for multiple law enforcement agencies despite misconduct allegations. His wife, Cynthia, was also arrested and sentenced to 41 years in prison for obstruction of justice and attempting to bribe a victim to recant their testimony. This case highlights the lifelong consequences corrupt police officers face. Number 6. Former Miami-Dade Police Lieutenant Braulio Gonzalez was accused of sexually molesting 2 girls, one of whom was a family member, at gunpoint over a 2-year period starting in 2011. He was charged with 7 counts of lewd and lascivious molestation of a child and 1 count of kidnapping. The jury found him guilty of all charges, including the kidnapping charge related to his first encounter with one of the minors. Gonzalez led the victim to his bedroom at gunpoint and sexually assaulted her repeatedly. He has been sentenced to life in prison. Braulio Gonzalez, a former Miami-Dade police lieutenant, was found guilty of sexually assaulting 2 young girls, one of whom was a family member at gunpoint. He was charged with 7 counts of lewd and lascivious molestation of a child and 1 count of kidnapping. After his arrest in 2018, he was put under house arrest and continued to receive his salary from the department. Another victim came forward 9 months later, and Gonzalez was sent to jail. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, although he is appealing the verdict. Police records suggest that Gonzalez had previously attacked other women, but he did not lose his job with the Miami-Dade Police Force despite his superior's knowledge of these incidents.